I'm Angela, 32, a single mom and nurse who fought tooth and nail to build a life my daughter Lily could be proud of. My wealthy family never approved of my modest career choice, but nothing prepared me for my brother Maxwell's humiliating comment at mom's 60th birthday dinner. "Are you sure you can even afford to eat here?" As tears threatened, and my 8-year-old daughter squeezed my hand under the table, the restaurant manager approached. What happened next changed my family dynamic forever. If you're watching this, let me know where you're from. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you've ever been underestimated by the people who should support you the most. I read every comment and would love to hear your stories of standing tall when others tried to make you feel small. Growing up in Wellesley, one of Boston's wealthiest suburbs, meant expectations were always high. Our 5-bedroom colonial with its manicured lawn and heated pool was my childhood home, but I never quite felt like I belonged there. My father, Richard Hamilton, built his fortune as an investment banker, working 60-hour weeks and expecting nothing less than excellence from his children. My mother, Victoria, came from old money, the kind of family where social connections and appearances meant everything. I was the youngest of 3, and from an early age it was clear I marched to the beat of a different drum. My brother Maxwell, now 36, was the golden child, captain of the lacrosse team, Harvard Business School graduate, and now a successful hedge fund manager with a corner office overlooking Boston Harbor. My sister Elizabeth, 34, did exactly what was expected of her. She majored in art history at Wellesley College, married the son of one of my father's business partners, and now divides her time between charity galas and decorating their vacation homes. Then there was me. While Maxwell and Elizabeth competed for the highest SAT scores and most prestigious internships, I volunteered at the local animal shelter and tutored kids from underserved communities. I still remember my 12th birthday when I asked for donations to the homeless shelter instead of presents. My mother actually cried not from pride, but from embarrassment when she had to explain to her friends why there wouldn't be a lavish party. "Angela, darling," she had said, pinching the bridge of her nose, "there are appropriate ways for people of our standing to be charitable. Writing checks at fundraisers, joining the right boards. This is just uncomfortable for everyone." By high school, the family joke was that I had been switched at birth. When I expressed interest in becoming a nurse, my father actually laughed. "A Hamilton changing bedpans? I don't think so," he said dismissively over dinner. "Law school, business school, medical school if you must. Those are appropriate options." But I was stubborn. I'd always been drawn to helping people directly, getting my hands dirty, rather than directing from behind a desk. The summer before college, I volunteered at a rural health clinic, and that sealed my fate. Seeing nurses provide compassionate care to people who really needed it, I knew that's what I wanted to do with my life. I chose to attend the University of Massachusetts instead of the Ivy League schools my siblings had attended. My father barely spoke to me for months after I made my decision, and my mother acted like I had terminal cancer, speaking about my choice in hushed, worried tones to her friends. It was during my sophomore year that I met Daniel. He was pre-law handsome from a good family in Connecticut. When I brought him home, my parents were visibly relieved. Perhaps I could be salvaged after all. Married to a future lawyer, I could still maintain the family's social standing, even with my hobby of nursing. For a while, it seemed like things might work out. Daniel and I got married right after graduation, and I started my nursing program while he began law school. My family actually seemed proud at our wedding, introducing me to their friends, without the usual qualifiers about my alternative career path. The trouble began when I got pregnant with Lily during Daniel's second year of law school. It wasn't planned, but we were excited. Daniel less so as time went on, and the reality of fatherhood loomed alongside his law school pressures. By the time Lily was born, he was spending more time studying at the library than at home with us. When Lily was 6 months old, I discovered what studying at the library really meant: an affair with a fellow law student. Our divorce was quick but painful. My family's reaction was perhaps even more painful. There was a distinct undercurrent of "we told you so" in their supposed sympathy. "Well, this is what happens when you rush into things," my mother said, sipping her tea in her perfectly appointed living room, while I sat across from her exhausted from single motherhood and nursing school. "If you'd gone to Harvard like we suggested, you might have met someone more committed." As if Daniel's infidelity was somehow my fault for choosing the wrong college. as if my nursing degree had somehow caused my husband to cheat. The years that followed were a blur of working night shifts, finishing my nursing degree, arranging childcare, and trying to build a stable life for Lily. I didn't have the luxury of family money to fall back on. My parents believed in self-sufficiency once we were adults, at least for the child who had disappointed them. Maxwell received investment opportunities from my father regularly. Elizabeth and her husband were gifted a down payment for their first home. I received occasional birthday checks and lots of unsolicited advice. Family gatherings became increasingly uncomfortable as the wealth gap between us grew more obvious. Maxwell would talk about his latest European vacation, while I calculated if I could afford new school shoes for Lily that month. Elizabeth would complain about contractor issues on their lake house renovation, while I worried about the increasing rent on my two-bedroom apartment. But I was proud of what I'd built. By the time Lily was 8, I had established myself as a respected emergency room nurse at Boston Memorial Hospital. I had recently been promoted to charge nurse, a position that came with more responsibility and a welcome pay increase. I was even saving for a modest house in a good school district. Nothing like the mansion I grew up in, but a home that would be ours. Lily was thriving too. Bright, compassionate with my stubborn streak, but none of my family's materialistic values. She was the best thing in my life, and I was determined to show her that success isn't measured by the size of your bank account, but by the lives you touch and the person you become. When the invitation came for my mother's 60th birthday dinner at Le Ciel Bleu, one of Boston's most exclusive restaurants, my first instinct was to find an excuse not to go. The thought of another evening of subtle digs and condescending comments made my stomach knot. But Lily had been asking about seeing her cousins, and despite everything, Victoria was still her grandmother. "I want to give Grandma my special card," Lily said, holding up the handmade birthday card she'd spent hours creating, complete with glitter that now covered most of our kitchen table. "Do you think she'll like it?" Looking at her hopeful face, I couldn't disappoint her. "She'll love it, sweetie. We'll both go wish Grandma a happy birthday." What I didn't tell Lily was that I'd been saving for 3 months to afford this dinner. Le Ciel Bleu was the kind of place where appetizers cost more than my weekly grocery budget, but I was determined to pay my own way. I refused to give Maxwell or Elizabeth the satisfaction of covering my bill. As my mother's birthday approached, my anxiety grew proportionately. I checked my bank account daily, making sure the carefully set-aside dinner fund remained untouched, despite the temptation of Lily's outgrown sneakers and the leaky faucet in our bathroom that really needed professional attention. 2 weeks before the dinner, I realized I had nothing suitable to wear. My work wardrobe consisted mainly of scrubs, and my casual clothes were practical rather than fashionable. The last time I'd worn a dress to a family function, Elizabeth had made a comment about how brave I was to recycle outfits year after year. With my budget stretched thin by the upcoming dinner, a shopping trip to the kind of stores my mother and sister frequented was out of the question. Instead, I spent a Saturday morning visiting thrift stores in the more affluent neighborhoods, where designer items were sometimes donated with tags still attached. My persistence paid off at the third store, where I found a classic black dress with a subtle shimmer that looked far more expensive than the $35 on its price tag. It fit perfectly, hugging my curves without being inappropriate for a family dinner. A pair of black heels from the same store completed the look. "You look like a princess mommy," Lily said when I tried everything on at home. "Thank you, sweetie, you'll be my princess too," I replied, having found a pretty purple dress for her as well. We twirled around our small living room together, practicing our fancy restaurant manners and giggling. But when the giggles faded and Lily was asleep, I found myself standing in front of the bathroom mirror, rehearsing responses to the inevitable comments. "Yes, the hospital is very busy, but I find the work fulfilling." "Lily is doing wonderfully in school, thank you for asking." "No, I haven't had a chance to vacation this year, but we did enjoy the free concert series in the park." Each practice response was delivered with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. I hated that after all these years, my family could still make me feel like I was somehow less than them because my bank account had fewer zeros. The day before the dinner, I called my best friend Maya for a pep talk. Maya and I had met in nursing school, both single mothers supporting each other through late-night study sessions and childcare emergencies. She knew my family situation all too well. "Remember who you are, Aang," she said firmly. You save lives every day. You're raising an amazing daughter on your own. You don't need their approval. I know that intellectually. I sighed. But something happens when I'm around them. I feel like I'm 16 again, desperate for my father to notice my achievements. Then focus on Lily. Show her how to handle difficult people with grace. You're not going for them, you're going for her, and to respect your mother's milestone birthday. Maya was right as usual. This wasn't about me seeking validation from people who had never really seen me. It was about teaching Lily that family relationships, even imperfect ones, were worth the effort. And it was about respecting my mother's 60th birthday, regardless of our differences. The evening of the dinner arrived with clear skies and mild temperatures, a beautiful October night in Boston. I had splurged on having my hair blown out at an inexpensive salon, and with my thrift store dress and a careful application of makeup, I actually felt confident as Lily and I headed to my 10-year-old Honda Civic. Le Ciel Bleu was located in Boston's Back Bay, housed in a beautifully restored brownstone with discreet gold lettering on the door and an actual red carpet leading to the entrance. A valet approached as we pulled up, looking momentarily confused by my older model car among the luxury vehicles already parked. "Good evening, ma'am," he said professionally, recovering quickly. "Good evening," I replied, handing him my keys and trying not to wince at the thought of my car being parked alongside Maxwell's Porsche and Elizabeth's Range Rover. Lily's eyes were wide as we walked into the restaurant. The interior was elegant without being ostentatious. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables dressed in crisp white linens, fresh flower arrangements centering each one. A pianist played softly in the corner, and the gentle murmur of conversation was punctuated by the occasional clink of fine china and crystal. "This is fancy," Lily whispered, gripping my hand tightly. "Remember what we practiced," I whispered back. "Stand straight, speak clearly, and if you're not sure which fork to use, just watch me." The maitre d' approached with a welcoming smile. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" "Yes, we're with the Hamilton party for Victoria Hamilton's birthday," I explained. His expression shifted slightly, and I couldn't tell if it was recognition of the Hamilton name or surprise that I was part of that party. Either way, he nodded courteously. "Of course. The other members of your party have not yet arrived. Would you like to wait at the bar or be seated at the table?" Before I could answer, another man approached, tall, with salt and pepper hair and a warm smile that reached his eyes. He wore an impeccably tailored suit and carried himself with quiet authority. "I'll take care of the Hamiltons, Pierre," he said to the maitre d'. Turning to us, he extended his hand. "James Whitman, manager of Le Ciel Bleu. We're honored to host Mrs. Hamilton's birthday celebration tonight." "Angela Hamilton," I replied, shaking his hand. "And this is my daughter, Lily." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Whitman," Lily said, clearly extending her small hand just as we had practiced. James looked delighted as he bent slightly to shake her hand. "The pleasure is mine, Miss Lily. It's not every day we have such well-mannered young guests." Lily beamed at the compliment, standing a little taller. "Would you prefer to wait at your table? I'd be happy to escort you personally," James offered. "That would be lovely, thank you," I replied, relieved to avoid awkward small talk at the bar, where my inability to order an expensive cocktail would be immediately obvious. As we followed James through the restaurant, I noticed several diners looking up as we passed. I was used to being invisible in places like this, but something about James's attentive manner made us more noticeable. "Your table is in our garden room," James explained, leading us to a separate dining area at the back of the restaurant. A wall of windows overlooked a small but exquisite garden, illuminated by fairy lights, creating the illusion of dining under the stars. "It's beautiful," I said sincerely. "Mrs. Hamilton requested our best table," James replied. "Please make yourselves comfortable. Your server this evening will be Thomas. Can I have something brought while you wait for your family? Perhaps a sparkling water for you, and a special mocktail for Miss Lily." "That sounds perfect, thank you," I said, appreciating his thoughtfulness in suggesting non-alcoholic options without highlighting the cost. After James departed, Lily and I admired the garden view and the elaborate table setting. The china was bone white with a delicate gold rim, the crystal caught the light from the chandeliers, and the silver cutlery was heavy and ornate. Multiple forks, spoons, and knives were arranged precisely on either side of each plate. "Remember," I whispered to Lily, "work from the outside in with the silverware." "Like in Pretty Woman," she whispered back, referring to the movie we had watched together the previous weekend in preparation for this dinner. I laughed. Exactly like that. Thomas arrived with our drinks, sparkling water with lemon for me, and a colorful mocktail in a fancy glass with a paper umbrella for Lily, who looked thrilled. "This is the Princess Special," Thomas told her with a wink, "made with raspberry syrup, fresh lime juice, and sparkling water." "Thank you," Lily said carefully, picking up her glass with both hands. The next 20 minutes passed pleasantly as we sipped our drinks and played a quiet game of I Spy. Then I heard familiar voices approaching and steeled myself for the evening ahead. Maxwell arrived first, his wife Natalie on his arm. She wore a red designer dress that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent diamonds glittering at her ears and throat. Maxwell's custom suit fit him perfectly, his Italian leather shoes polished to a shine. "Angela," he said with mild surprise, as if he hadn't expected me to actually show up. And Lily, right? He directed this at my daughter, who had seen her uncle perhaps 5 times in her 8 years. "Yes, Uncle Maxwell," Lily replied politely. "It's nice to see you." "You too, kiddo," he said absently, his attention already shifting as he selected the chair at the head of the table, my father's usual spot. Natalie gave me a quick air kiss near my cheek. "Love the dress, very practical." Before I could respond, Elizabeth and her husband Charles arrived with their twin boys Alexander and Jonathan, both 10. Elizabeth's blonde hair was swept up in an elaborate updo, her navy blue dress clearly designer. Charles looked bored already, his attention on his phone. "Angela," Elizabeth exclaimed with exaggerated warmth. "What a surprise, I didn't think you'd be able to make it with your work schedule." The subtext was clear. She had hoped I wouldn't come. "I wouldn't miss Mom's birthday," I replied evenly. Elizabeth's eyes flicked over my appearance, lingering on my shoes, and the simple silver pendant around my neck, a gift from Lily last Christmas, purchased with money she had saved from small chores. "Interesting necklace," she commented. "Is it vintage?" "It's a gift from Lily," I said, touching the pendant protectively. Lily beamed beside me, missing the subtle dig. The twins barely acknowledged their cousin immediately pulling out handheld gaming devices despite the formal setting. Elizabeth made no move to correct them. My parents were the last to arrive. My father Richard still cut an impressive figure at 65, his silver hair and commanding presence drawing attention as he entered the room. My mother Victoria, the woman of the hour, was elegant in a champagne-colored gown, her salon-perfect hair and expertly applied makeup hiding her age effectively. "There's the birthday girl," Maxwell called out, standing to kiss our mother's cheek. Victoria beamed, accepting the attention as her due. She exchanged kisses with Elizabeth and Natalie, complimenting their outfits and jewelry. When she finally turned to me, her smile dimmed slightly. "Angela, dear, you made it." Her tone suggested both surprise and a hint of disappointment. "Happy birthday, Mom," I said, giving her the card Lily and I had brought. Lily had insisted on making it herself, spending hours drawing a detailed picture of Victoria surrounded by birthday cakes and presents. Inside, she had written, "Happy 60th birthday, Grandma, I love you," in her best handwriting. Victoria opened the envelope and glanced at the card briefly. "How creative," she said quickly, setting it aside to reach for a small gift bag Elizabeth was holding out. Inside was an expensive-looking silk scarf, which Victoria immediately draped around her neck, exclaiming over the perfect color. Lily's face fell slightly, but she rallied when I squeezed her hand under the table. "I have a gift for you too, Grandma," Lily said bravely, holding out the small package she had wrapped herself. Inside was a handmade bracelet of beads and charms that Lily had created at her after-school art program. "Look at that," Victoria said, holding the bracelet gingerly, as if it might soil her outfit. "Isn't that unique?" "I made it myself," Lily said proudly. "The blue beads are because Mom says blue is your favorite color." "How thoughtful," Victoria replied, placing the bracelet back in its box without putting it on. "I'll keep it safe in here." As everyone settled into their seats, I noticed that Lily and I had been placed at the far end of the table, physically separated from the rest of the family. Richard sat at one end with Victoria on his right and Maxwell on his left. Elizabeth and Charles sat beside Victoria, their twins, next to them. Natalie sat beside Maxwell, leaving the two least desirable seats for Lily and me. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. We were physically and figuratively on the periphery of the family. As we settled into our seats, Maxwell immediately took charge of ordering wine, not bothering to consult anyone's preferences. "We'll start with the Dom Perignon, of course," he told the sommelier confidently. "Then the 2015 Chateau Margaux with dinner." The sommelier nodded approvingly. "Excellent choices, sir." I glanced discreetly at the wine list and had to control my expression when I saw the prices. The champagne alone cost more than my monthly car payment. I silently reaffirmed my decision to stick with water throughout the meal. The conversation flowed around Lily and me as if we were invisible. Maxwell dominated loudly, discussing his recent business trip to Tokyo. "The suite at the Aman Tokyo was incredible," he boasted. 47th floor panoramic views of the city and Mount Fuji, worth every penny of the $2,000 a night. "We're thinking of taking the boys to Tokyo next summer," Elizabeth chimed in. "Charles's new position comes with increased vacation time, and we want the boys to experience different cultures." "Speaking of travel," Maxwell turned to me, suddenly putting me on the spot. "Any exciting vacation plans, Angela? Taking advantage of those, what do they call them in your profession?" "Staycations." He chuckled at his own joke. "Lily and I went camping in the White Mountains last summer," I replied, trying to keep my voice even. "It was beautiful." "Camping," Natalie repeated, as if the word tasted strange in her mouth. "How rustic." "We had so much fun," Lily added enthusiastically. "Mom taught me how to identify different trees and birds, and we saw a real beaver building a dam." "Well, that sounds very educational," Victoria said with a tight smile. "Though I would think at her age, exposure to culture and art would be more valuable than wildlife." "We do that too," I said, feeling defensive. "We have a membership to the Children's Museum, and we visit the MFA on free admission days." "Free admission days," Elizabeth murmured to Charles, just loud enough for me to hear. "Can you imagine?" The appetizers arrived, saving me from having to respond. Maxwell and my father had ordered several for the table: oysters, foie gras, and a seafood tower that probably cost as much as my weekly grocery budget. "Dig in, everyone," my father encouraged. "It's a celebration after all." I helped Lily select a few items I knew she would enjoy, conscious of not taking too much of the expensive spread myself. We'd had a light dinner before coming, just in case the portions were as small as they typically were at upscale restaurants. As we ate, Elizabeth steered the conversation to her recent redecoration of their home in Beacon Hill. The interior designer insisted we needed to completely reimagine the space, she explained, gesturing with a forkful of foie gras. 60,000 later, it's finally starting to feel like home. "You should see the new kitchen," Victoria added proudly. "Italian marble custom cabinetry. Simply divine." "We're considering renovating the vacation house in the Hamptons next." Charles contributed his first real addition to the conversation. "The four-car garage is simply inadequate now that Alexander is getting interested in my car collection." I concentrated on helping Lily navigate the unfamiliar foods, trying not to let the casual discussion of amounts that exceeded my annual salary make me feel small. "And how is your apartment, Angela?" Victoria asked, the slight pause making the word apartment sound like a temporary housing solution rather than my home. "It's great," I said firmly. "We recently repainted Lily's room together. She chose a beautiful sky blue. Mom let me put glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling," Lily added. "At night, it looks like we're sleeping outside." "How creative," Elizabeth said with the same tone Victoria had used for Lily's handmade card. When it was time to order our main courses, the pattern continued. Maxwell selected a dry-aged tomahawk steak for $85. Elizabeth and Charles both ordered the lobster. My father chose the duck while my mother selected the sea bass. Natalie went with the scallops. Even the twins were allowed to order miniature filet mignons from the adult menu, rather than from the children's options. When the server reached me, I had already decided on one of the least expensive items. "I'll have the herb roasted chicken, please," I said. The $32 price tag was still steep, but manageable within my budget. "And for your daughter?" the server asked. "The children's pasta, please," I replied. At $18, it was the most reasonable option. As the server moved away, Maxwell leaned across the table with a smirk. "Chicken at Le Ciel Bleu. That's like ordering a hamburger at a sushi restaurant." "I like chicken," I said simply. "Are you sure you can even afford to eat here?" Maxwell asked with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "We can cover for you if needed." His voice carried just enough to ensure everyone at the table heard. The table fell silent. My cheeks burned as all eyes turned to me. Lily looked up at me with confusion, sensing the sudden tension, but not understanding its cause. "Maxwell," my father said half-heartedly, "not everyone prioritizes financial success the way you do." His words were perhaps intended as a defense, but they stung nearly as much as Maxwell's direct attack. The implication was clear. I had chosen not to be financially successful as if my career as a nurse was a hobby rather than a calling. "It must be so hard for you," Elizabeth added with fake sympathy, reaching across to pat my hand. "We really admire how you manage." I sat frozen, unable to form a response that wouldn't either escalate the situation or require me to swallow my dignity once again. Tears threatened, but I refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of Lily, who was watching me with worried eyes. "Mom," she whispered, squeezing my hand under the table. I was contemplating excusing myself to the restroom when I noticed James, the restaurant manager, approaching our table. His expression was professional, but there was something in his eyes, a determination that hadn't been there earlier. "Excuse me," he said, addressing the table with a warm smile. "I hope you're all enjoying your evening." "Everything is wonderful, as usual, James," my mother replied. "Le ciel bleu never disappoints." "I'm delighted to hear that Mrs. Hamilton," James said before turning to look directly at me. "Ms. Hamilton, I thought I recognized you when you arrived, but I wanted to be certain before approaching." I blinked in confusion. "I'm sorry, have we met before?" "Not formally," James replied, "but I believe I owe you a debt of gratitude that can never be repaid." The entire table was watching now, my family's expressions ranging from confusion to annoyance at the interruption. 3 months ago, my mother was brought to Boston Memorial Hospital with a severe allergic reaction, James continued. She couldn't breathe, her blood pressure was dropping dangerously. The doctor said later that she was minutes from death. I felt a glimmer of recognition. "Mrs. Whitman's shellfish allergy." James nodded, his eyes bright with emotion. "Yes, you were the charge nurse in the ER that night. The doctor was delayed with another critical patient, but you recognized the severity of her condition immediately. You administered epinephrine, established an airway, and stayed with her until she stabilized." The memory came back clearly now. An elderly woman brought in by ambulance after accidentally consuming shrimp at a friend's dinner party. Her throat had swollen shut, her lips blue from lack of oxygen. It had been a close call. "I was just doing my job," I said softly. "The attending physician told me that without your quick action and expertise, my mother would have died before he could get to her," James said firmly. "You didn't just do your job, you saved her life." I was acutely aware of my family's stunned expressions. This wasn't how they were used to hearing me described. "My mother speaks of you often," James continued. "She calls you her guardian angel. She described you perfectly. Kind eyes, gentle hands, and a calm voice even in crisis. When you walked in tonight, I thought it might be you, but I wasn't certain until just now." "How is your mother doing?" I asked, genuinely concerned. "Wonderfully, thanks to you. She's more careful about checking ingredients now, and she always carries her EpiPen." James turned to address the entire table. "When I learned the Hamiltons had reserved our restaurant for a special birthday, I had no idea it would be the family of the nurse who saved my mother's life. It's an honor to have you here." My father looked thoughtful. Maxwell appeared uncomfortable, and my mother seemed torn between embarrassment and a strange new pride. "In light of this remarkable coincidence," James continued smoothly, "I would be honored if Ms. Hamilton and her daughter would accept tonight's dinner as my personal guests. It's a small token of my appreciation." "Oh, that's really not necessary," I began, but James held up a hand. "I insist. In fact, I've taken the liberty of speaking with our chef. He would like to prepare his special tasting menu for you and your daughter. It's not on the regular menu, but it's truly the best experience Le Ciel Bleu has to offer. The tasting menu. I had seen it mentioned on the restaurant's website while researching for this dinner. 10 courses of the chef's finest creations, normally priced at $200 per person. Maxwell cleared his throat. James, you should know I was just joking earlier. Of course my sister can afford to dine here. It was just a bit of family teasing. James turned to Maxwell, his smile never wavering, though his eyes cooled slightly. Some matters aren't appropriate for humor, sir, especially regarding someone who saves lives for a living. Maxwell had the grace to look abashed. Victoria jumped in, clearly trying to salvage the situation. Angela has always been our heroic one, she claimed, as if she had been bragging about my career all along. Even as a child, she was always helping others. We're tremendously proud of her work. I nearly choked on my water at this complete revision of history, but said nothing. As you should be, James agreed. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'll inform the chef to begin preparing the tasting menu for Miss Hamilton and Miss Lily. As he walked away, the table erupted in overlapping conversations. I had no idea your work was so hands-on, Elizabeth said, looking at me as if seeing me for the first time. Of course it's hands-on, I replied. I'm an emergency room nurse. People's lives depend on quick thinking and immediate action. But you actually saved someone's life? Maxwell asked, sounding genuinely curious rather than condescending for once. Like if you hadn't been there, they would have died. It happens more often than you might think, I said simply. That's why I became a nurse, to make a real difference for people when they need help most. Mommy saves people all the time, Lily said proudly. She has special medicine that helps people breathe again, and machines that can restart hearts. My family exchanged glances, clearly recalibrating their understanding of what I actually did for a living. All these years, I realized they had probably imagined me performing menial tasks following doctor's orders, without much independent thought or skill. I had no idea, my mother admitted quietly. You never asked. I pointed out, my voice gentle but firm. The arrival of our main courses created a momentary diversion from the revelation about my career. As promised, the chef had prepared a special tasting menu for Lily and me. The first course arrived, a small but exquisite plate featuring seared scallops with a saffron sauce that made Lily's eyes widen with delight. "This is fancy food, Mom," she whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "It certainly is, sweetie," I agreed, helping her navigate the unfamiliar culinary territory. I noticed the staff treating me differently now. Several servers stopped by our end of the table to check specifically on our experience, addressing me by name with genuine respect in their voices. Maxwell attempted to regain control of the conversation, discussing a recent investment opportunity he'd pursued. It's a tech startup with incredible potential. I got in on the ground floor, could easily triple my investment within a year. But for once, his financial boasting didn't command the table's full attention. Elizabeth kept glancing at me with a puzzled expression, as if trying to reconcile her image of her little sister with this new information. "Angela," she said during a lull in the conversation, "do you ever think about going back to school to become a doctor, perhaps?" The question revealed how little she understood about nursing as a profession. The assumption that it was merely a stepping stone to medicine, rather than a distinct and valuable healthcare role in its own right. "I love being a nurse," I replied. "Doctors diagnose and prescribe, but nurses are with patients through every step of their healing journey. We monitor, advocate, educate, and comfort. It's not a consolation prize, it's exactly what I want to do." "But surely the pay difference," Charles began before Elizabeth elbowed him subtly. "It's not always about the money," I said, surprising myself with my confidence. "It's about finding meaning in your work, making a tangible difference in people's lives." Lily nodded sagely beside me. "Mom says helping people is better than having lots of money, but nobody to share it with." Out of the mouths of babes, my family looked uncomfortable at this simple truth from an 8-year-old. Our tasting menu continued with course after exquisite course, lobster bisque with truffle foam beef tenderloin with a red wine reduction so complex it tasted like velvet, a palate-cleansing sorbet that made Lily giggle with delight as it fizzed on her tongue. Between courses, an unexpected visitor approached our table. A distinguished-looking older man supported by a cane, accompanied by a woman I recognized immediately. "Mrs. Whitman," I said, standing to greet James's mother. "It's wonderful to see you looking so well." "Thanks to you, dear," she said, taking my hands in hers. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "James told me you were here tonight. I hope you don't mind that I insisted on coming down from our apartment upstairs to thank you in person." "Not at all," I assured her. "This is my daughter Lily." "Hello," Lily said politely. "Your son gave us special food." Mrs. Whitman laughed. "I'm sure he did. James owns this restaurant, you know. He's a wonderful boy." I hadn't realized James was the owner, rather than just the manager. This explained the deference other staff showed him. "And this is my husband, Edward," Mrs. Whitman continued, introducing the gentleman with her. "He's been wanting to meet the young woman who saved his wife of 47 years. Edward extended his hand. "No words can express our gratitude, Ms. Hamilton. Because of your quick thinking, I still have my Elaine." My family watched this exchange in stunned silence. Victoria appeared to be reassessing me entirely, while my father wore an expression I hadn't seen directed at me in years, something that looked remarkably like respect. After the Whitmans left, other diners approached our table. An older couple stopped to thank me for caring for their grandson after a car accident. A young man recognized me from his mother's stay in the hospital following surgery. Even one of the servers whispered a thank you for helping her brother when he came to the ER with a sports injury. I was overwhelmed by this unexpected recognition. In the hospital, we rarely saw patients after they recovered. This glimpse into the lasting impact of my work was both humbling and affirming. The dynamic at our table had shifted dramatically. My siblings seemed unsure how to reclaim their usual dominance in the conversation. Even Victoria appeared conflicted, caught between her ingrained view of me as the family disappointment and this new public recognition of my value. When the dessert cart arrived, the pastry chef himself came to present his creations to Lily and me first, an honor that clearly surprised my family. "The chocolate soufflé is my personal recommendation," he told us with a warm smile. "I prepared it with an 8-year-old chocolate connoisseur in mind." Lily beamed at being called a connoisseur, a word she had just learned in school the previous week. "That sounds perfect," I told him, returning his smile. Maxwell watched this exchange with narrowed eyes before loudly declaring that we would need a bottle of Chateau d'Yquem dessert wine for the table. "It pairs beautifully with chocolate," he announced clearly, trying to reassert his expertise. When the check eventually arrived, James personally delivered it to my father with a note clearly indicating that Lily's and my portions had been taken care of. Maxwell immediately reached for the bill. "I'll get this," he said firmly. "It's Mom's birthday after all." I noticed a new defensiveness in his generosity, as if he needed to prove something after his earlier comment about my finances. The subtle power shift at the table was palpable. As the dinner wound down, my mother suggested moving to the lounge area for after-dinner drinks. While the others gathered their things, I sought out James to express my gratitude privately. "Thank you for your kindness tonight," I said sincerely when I found him near the kitchen entrance. "But you really didn't need to comp our meals." "It was the least I could do," he replied. "My mother talks about you constantly, you know. She keeps a photo of you from the hospital newsletter on her refrigerator. Says it reminds her to be grateful for each day." I was touched by this revelation. I was just doing my job. "A job that matters," James pointed out. "More than many of us can say." He hesitated before adding, "I hope you don't mind my interference earlier. I couldn't stand by watching your brother speak to you that way." "It was illuminating," I admitted. "For all of us, I think." In the lounge area, my family had arranged themselves on plush sofas. Victoria immediately motioned me to sit beside her, a first in recent memory. "Angela, dear," she said, patting the cushion next to her. "I've been thinking, we should have you and Lily over for dinner more often. The boys hardly know their cousin." The sudden shift in her attitude was jarring, but not entirely surprising. Public validation had always been Victoria's currency. "That would be nice, Mom," I replied cautiously. "And perhaps you could tell us more about your work," she continued. "It seems we've underestimated the significance of what you do." Before I could respond, Maxwell interrupted, still trying to recover his usual dominance. "It was just a joke earlier, Angie," he said dismissively. You know how family dinners go? A little teasing is normal. No need to make a big deal of it. Something shifted inside me at his words. After years of swallowing such dismissals, I found I no longer had the patience for them. It wasn't a joke, Maxwell, I said calmly but firmly. It was the latest in a pattern of belittling comments that I've tolerated for far too long. The lounge fell silent. Even Lily looked up from her mocktail, sensing the importance of the moment. That's not fair, Maxwell protested weakly. We're family. We tease each other. No, I corrected him. You, Elizabeth, and often Mom make cutting remarks about my career, my finances, and my life choices. That's not teasing. It's criticism disguised as humor, so you can dismiss my feelings when I object. Elizabeth shifted uncomfortably. You're being too sensitive, she began, but I cut her off. Let me ask you something, Liz. When was the last time someone teased you about your designer clothes or your vacation home? When did Maxwell last get teased about his investment portfolio? She had no answer. Victoria attempted to intervene. Angela, darling, tonight is supposed to be a celebration. Perhaps this conversation could wait for another time. I've waited for years, Mom, I replied. I've sat through countless family gatherings where my worth was measured against my bank account and found wanting. I've made excuses to Lily about why her grandmother rarely calls, why her uncle can't remember her name, why her cousins don't invite her to their birthday parties. Victoria looked stricken. I call, she protested weakly. Twice a year, I finished for her. Christmas and Lily's birthday, the absolute minimum to maintain the appearance of being a grandmother. I've been busy, she said defensively. We're all busy, Mom. It's about priorities. To my surprise, my father spoke up. She's right, Victoria. He turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. We haven't been fair to you, Angela. Or to Lily. This unexpected support from my father momentarily left me speechless. I always respected your choice, he continued, even if I didn't understand it initially. But I let your mother and siblings set the tone for how the family treated you, and that was wrong. Elizabeth looked at me with a strange expression, almost envious. I didn't think you were actually happy, she admitted. I thought you were just making the best of circumstances, because you couldn't imagine being fulfilled without wealth and status, I guessed. She nodded slowly. When I saw how those people looked at you tonight, with such genuine gratitude and respect, I realized I've never experienced that. No one has ever thanked me for changing their life. It's not too late to find more meaningful work, I suggested gently. Elizabeth gave a small, sad smile. Maybe. I don't even know what I'm good at anymore besides shopping and planning dinner parties. Maxwell had been unusually quiet during this exchange. Now he spoke up, his typical bravado missing. I didn't realize you felt this way, Angela. About us, I mean. Because you never asked, I pointed out. You assumed my life was less valuable because I earn less money, live in a smaller house, drive an older car. But those aren't the metrics that matter to me. What does matter to you? He asked, and for once he seemed genuinely curious rather than judgmental. Making a difference. Teaching Lily to be kind and brave, building a community of people who care about each other, finding joy in simple pleasures rather than constantly chasing more. Richard nodded thoughtfully. Wisdom that took me far too long to learn, he said quietly. The corner office isn't much comfort when you realize you've missed your children growing up. Victoria reached out tentatively to touch my hand. I've been a poor mother to you, haven't I? The question caught me off guard with its vulnerability. You've been the mother you knew how to be, I said carefully. But yes, I needed more support and less judgment. And Lily needed a grandmother who saw her worth beyond her pedigree. My father added, surprising me again with his insight. It's not too late, I said, looking at my family gathered around me. But things need to change. I won't expose Lily to people who make her feel less than, even if they're family, especially if they're family. What do you want from us? Maxwell asked directly. Respect, I answered simply. For my choices, my career, my parenting, and genuine interest in Lily's life, not just token appearances at major holidays. I can do better, Victoria said quietly. I want to do better. I looked at my daughter, who had been listening to this entire exchange with the careful attention children reserve for adult conversations that concern them. What do you think, Lily? Should we give Grandma and the family another chance? Lily considered this seriously. If they promise to be nice, and if they come to our house sometimes instead of us always going to their houses. Out of the mouths of babes again. My family looked startled at the simple but profound request that we not always be the ones accommodating them, that sometimes they might enter our world instead. I think that's fair, I agreed, looking at my mother questioningly. Victoria hesitated only briefly before nodding. We would be honored to visit your home, Lily. As we prepared to leave, I felt lighter than I had in years. Nothing had been magically fixed. Years of family dynamics wouldn't change overnight. But for the first time, I had spoken my truth and been heard. I had set boundaries not just for myself, but for Lily, showing her by example that she deserved respect. Walking to the valet stand with Lily's hand in mine, I realized that sometimes it takes an outsider, someone like James, to help families see what was always there. And sometimes it takes a moment of public humiliation, followed by unexpected validation, to break patterns that seemed permanently established. As we waited for our car, I felt a tentative touch on my arm. Turning, I found my father standing there, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. I'm proud of you, Angela, he said simply. I should have told you that a long time ago. They were the words I had longed to hear throughout my childhood and early adulthood. Now at 32, I found they still had the power to heal old wounds. Thank you, Dad, I replied, meaning it. That means a lot. As our Honda pulled up alongside Maxwell's Porsche, I felt no embarrassment. My car got us where we needed to go safely and reliably. Just as my career might not make me rich, but it gave me purpose and made a real difference in people's lives. Just as my modest home might not impress anyone, but it was filled with love and laughter. By standing up for myself and Lily, I had reclaimed the narrative of my own life. And in doing so, I might have finally found a path to a healthier relationship with my family, one based on who we really were, not who they had always expected me to be. 3 months after my mother's birthday dinner, a subtle but meaningful shift had occurred in my family dynamics. The change wasn't dramatic or immediate, but rather a series of small adjustments that collectively signaled a new direction in our relationships. Victoria had begun calling weekly her conversations with both Lily and me, gradually becoming less formal and more genuine. The first few calls had been awkward, with my mother struggling to find topics beyond the weather and general pleasantries. But by the fourth week, she was asking Lily about school projects and listening with what seemed like actual interest to my stories from the hospital. I saw a program about emergency medicine on PBS, she mentioned during one call. It made me think of you. The work looks incredibly challenging. It can be, I acknowledged, but that's part of what makes it meaningful. I never really understood that before, she admitted. The idea that challenge could be its own reward, separate from financial compensation. These small recognitions of my perspective, though long overdue, were healing in ways I hadn't anticipated. Perhaps the most surprising development came from my father. Richard had always been a distant figure, absorbed in his work, and leaving the business of family relationships primarily to Victoria. But 6 weeks after the birthday dinner, he appeared unexpectedly at Boston Memorial during my shift. Dad, I said, startled to see him standing at the nurse's station in his business suit, looking out of place among the controlled chaos of the emergency department. Is everything okay? Everything's fine, he assured me quickly. I was downtown for a meeting and thought I might see where you work. The uncertainty in his voice was so unlike my normally confident father that it took me a moment to respond. Would you like a tour? I'm due for a break anyway. As I showed him around the department explaining equipment and procedures, I was struck by his attentiveness. He asked thoughtful questions about protocols and team dynamics, his analytical mind engaging with my work in a way he never had before. It's like running a small company, he observed as he watched the coordinated efforts of doctors, nurses, and technicians responding to a trauma case. Everyone has defined roles, but you all need to adapt constantly as conditions change. I never thought of it that way, I replied. But you're right, except our bottom line is measured in lives saved rather than profit margins. He nodded thoughtfully, a more meaningful metric in many ways. Before leaving, he asked to see where I kept my personal things. Confused but curious, I led him to the staff locker room and opened my locker. Inside, taped to the door, was a crayon drawing Lily had made of me in my scrubs with "My Mom Helps People" written in wobbly letters across the top. "Your North Star," my father said softly, looking at the drawing. "Exactly," I agreed, surprised by his insight. "I had a similar picture once," he admitted, "from Elizabeth when she was about 5. It showed me in a suit with a briefcase. 'My daddy works hard,' was what she wrote." "What happened to it?" I asked. "I kept it in my desk drawer for years. Then somewhere along the way, a new office, a new desk, it disappeared." He paused. "Or perhaps I stopped looking at it. Stopped remembering why I was working so hard in the first place." It was perhaps the most personal conversation we'd ever had, this quiet moment in the hospital locker room, surrounded by the faint smell of antiseptic and the distant sounds of medical equipment. Maxwell's attitude adjustment had been less consistent. Old habits died hard, and his identity was so thoroughly wrapped up in financial achievement that he struggled to interact without references to money and status. But he was trying in his own way. When he learned that Lily's school was hosting a career day, he volunteered to participate alongside me. I was skeptical, but agreed, curious to see what would happen. To my surprise, Maxwell prepared a kid-friendly presentation about financial literacy, rather than boasting about his own success. He taught Lily's class about saving, basic investing concepts, and even touched on charitable giving. Watching him high-five my daughter when she correctly answered a question about compound interest, I glimpsed the uncle he could be if he stopped keeping score long enough to connect. Elizabeth's transformation was perhaps the most profound. 2 months after the dinner, she called to ask if we could meet for coffee without the rest of the family. "I've been doing some thinking," she said when we were settled in a cafe near my apartment, her suggestion rather than expecting me to travel to her neighborhood. "About my life, my choices, what I'm teaching the boys through my example." "What prompted this?" I asked, curious about her unusual introspection. "You did," she admitted. "Seeing you that night, how those people looked at you, it made me question everything. I realized I've been chasing a lifestyle rather than building a life." "That's pretty insightful, Liz," she smiled wryly. "Don't sound so surprised. I did graduate summa cum laude, you know, before I decided my only job was to be Charles's perfect wife and hostess." "What are you thinking of doing?" "I'm not sure yet. But Sarah, you remember my college roommate? She runs a nonprofit focused on arts education for underprivileged kids. She's been asking me to join their board for years, and I always claimed I was too busy with charity galas and tennis lessons." "That sounds perfect for you," I encouraged. "You always had a good eye for art, and you're incredibly organized." "I called her yesterday," Elizabeth confessed. "I'm meeting with her next week to discuss possibilities." As we continued talking, I realized Elizabeth and I were having our first real sisterly conversation in perhaps a decade. No competition, no judgment, just two women sharing experiences and supporting each other's growth. The most heartwarming change, however, was in the relationship between Victoria and Lily. My mother had always kept a certain distance from her youngest grandchild, treating her more like a delicate object than a person. But 3 weeks after the birthday dinner, Victoria asked if she could take Lily for an outing on Saturday. "What kind of outing?" I asked warily. "I thought perhaps the Children's Museum," Victoria suggested. "You mentioned having a membership." I was surprised she had remembered. Lily would love that. When Victoria arrived to pick up Lily, I was struck by her appropriate attire: slacks and a casual sweater rather than her usual designer outfit complete with jewelry. She had even worn comfortable walking shoes. "I researched the exhibits online," she told me somewhat nervously. "The butterfly garden and the science discovery area seemed like they might be of interest to an 8-year-old. But of course, Lily can choose what she'd like to see." Giving Lily agency in the decision-making process was so unlike my mother that I found myself momentarily speechless. When they returned 5 hours later, both were smiling. Lily clutched a small bag from the gift shop, and Victoria's perfectly coiffed hair was slightly disheveled. Grandma let me touch a starfish, Lily exclaimed. And we built a bridge that could hold 50 blocks before it collapsed. It was educational, Victoria said with a smile that suggested she had enjoyed herself far more than she had anticipated. Your daughter asks very insightful questions, Angela. She always has. I agreed, touched by the genuine warmth in my mother's voice when she spoke about Lily. The most significant test of our family's evolving dynamic came when I invited everyone to my apartment for a casual Sunday lunch. I had deliberately chosen to host at my home rather than meeting at a restaurant or my parents' house. If we were truly going to build a new kind of relationship, my family needed to step into my world, rather than always expecting me to adapt to theirs. I spent the morning preparing a simple but delicious meal. Nothing fancy, just homemade lasagna, garlic bread, and a fresh salad. Lily helped make brownies for dessert, her small hands carefully measuring ingredients as we talked about the importance of this day. Are you nervous about everyone coming to our house? She asked perceptively. A little, I admitted. It's the first time Grandma and Grandpa have been here. Our house isn't as big as theirs, Lily observed, but it's cozier. Exactly, I agreed, hugging her. And there's plenty of room for the things that matter most. At precisely noon, the doorbell rang. My parents arrived first, Victoria carrying a bouquet of flowers and Richard holding a gift bag. For your home, my mother explained, handing me the flowers. The young man at the florist assured me these would last the longest. It was such a thoughtful, practical consideration, so unlike my mother's usual grand but impractical gestures, that I was touched. They're beautiful, Mom. Thank you. Richard handed me the gift bag somewhat awkwardly. Inside was a framed photograph I had never seen before. Me, at about 5 years old, sitting on his lap in his office, both of us laughing at something off camera. I found it when I was going through some old files, he explained. Thought you might like to have it. I studied the photograph, struck by the genuine joy on both our faces. I don't remember this being taken. It was a rare day when I brought you to the office, he said. You were fascinated by the swivel chair at my desk. Spent an hour just spinning around and around. The memory of that simple happiness with my father brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Thank you for finding this. Elizabeth and her family arrived next, the twins more subdued than usual. Alexander approached Lily somewhat shyly. We brought Monopoly, he said, holding up the board game. Mom said you might like to play after lunch. I love Monopoly, Lily replied enthusiastically. I'm always the dog. What piece do you like? Duh, just like that, the cousins were chatting comfortably, the artificial distance that had separated them beginning to dissolve. Maxwell and Natalie were the last to arrive, and I noticed immediately that Maxwell had dressed down for the occasion. Khakis and a polo shirt rather than his usual designer suit. Hope we're not late, he said, handing me a bottle of wine. It was good quality, but not ostentatiously expensive. Another small but significant adjustment. As we gathered around my modest dining table, expanded with a folding table to accommodate everyone, I was struck by how different this felt from our usual family gatherings. The conversation flowed more naturally, without the undercurrent of competition that had always characterized our interactions. Victoria complimented the lasagna sincerely. This is delicious, Angela. Would you share the recipe? My cook might be able to recreate it. It's nothing fancy, I said. Just my adaptation of an old Italian recipe. I'd be happy to write it down for you. Or perhaps you could show me sometime, she suggested tentatively. I've never been much of a cook, but it might be nice to learn a few basics. The idea of my socialite mother wanting to learn to cook was so unexpected that I nearly dropped my fork. I'd like that, Mom. After lunch, while the children played Monopoly and the adults enjoyed coffee, James called. We had been in touch regularly since the birthday dinner, a friendship forming naturally between us. I hope I'm not interrupting, he said when I answered. I just wanted to see how things were going with your family visit. Surprisingly well, I told him. It feels like we're actually talking to each other for the first time in years. I'm glad, he said sincerely. Listen, my mother is asking if you and Lily might join us for dinner next weekend. Nothing fancy, just a family meal at our place. She's making her famous pot roast. We'd love to, I replied, touched by the invitation. When I rejoined my family, my mother looked curious. A friend, she asked. James Whitman, I explained. From the restaurant, we've kept in touch. How nice. Victoria said, and I detected no judgment in her tone. Another small victory. As the afternoon continued, I observed my family adapting to my home, my life, my reality. They seemed more relaxed here than at the formal restaurants and country clubs where we usually gathered. Even Maxwell eventually loosened up, joining the Monopoly game on the floor with the children, and laughing genuinely when Lily bankrupted him with hotels on Boardwalk and Park Place. When it was time for everyone to leave, the goodbyes were warmer than they had been in years. Hugs were exchanged, plans for future gatherings were discussed, and promises were made to stay in better touch. "This was lovely, Angela," my mother said as she prepared to leave. "Next time you must bring a dish to our house. Perhaps we could make it a regular tradition, alternating locations for family gatherings." "I'd like that," I agreed, recognizing the significance of her suggestion. No longer would I always be expected to adapt to their world. Sometimes they would meet me halfway. As I closed the door behind the last departing family member, Lily looked up at me with her perceptive eyes. "Family dinners aren't so scary anymore," she observed. "No, they're not," I agreed, hugging her close. "They're getting better." That night, as I tucked Lily into bed, she asked a question that caught me off guard. "Mom, are we rich?" I considered how to answer. "Not in the way Grandma and Grandpa are," I said carefully. "We don't have a big house or fancy cars or take expensive vacations. But we're rich in other ways, right?" she pressed. "That's what you always say." "Yes," I confirmed, smoothing her hair back from her forehead. "We're rich in the ways that matter most. We have each other. We have work that helps people. We have friends who care about us. And now we have family who are learning to see us for who we really are." "That's better than money," Lily decided, snuggling into her pillow. "Much better," I agreed. As I turned off her light, leaving just the glow-in-the-dark stars illuminating her ceiling, I reflected on the journey of the past 3 months. The painful confrontation at my mother's birthday dinner had been a catalyst for change, breaking open calcified family patterns and creating space for something healthier to grow. I thought of James and how his unexpected intervention had shifted the power dynamic that night. Sometimes it takes an outsider to help families see what was always there. The value in different choices, the strength in alternative paths, the wealth that comes from purpose rather than possessions. My family still had a long way to go. Old habits and attitudes wouldn't disappear overnight. But we had taken the first steps toward genuine connection, toward seeing and respecting each other as we truly were, rather than measuring worth by bank balances and prestigious addresses. In my own quiet way, I had finally stood up for myself and for Lily, setting boundaries that protected our dignity while leaving the door open for healthier relationships. I had discovered that self-worth comes from within, but standing up for yourself is essential, a lesson I hope to model for my daughter as she grew. As I prepared for bed that night, I smiled at the framed photograph my father had given me. That laughing child on her father's lap had always been there beneath the layers of judgment and misunderstanding that had accumulated over the years. Perhaps now finally my family was beginning to see her again, and to see me, the woman she had become, with new and appreciative eyes. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who misunderstood your life choices? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes it takes real courage to set boundaries with the people we love. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more authentic life experiences. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that their worth isn't measured by their bank account or job title. Thank you for listening to my journey. Remember that true family supports each other's paths even when they differ from expectations. Your life, your choices, your value is uniquely yours.